Hello friends, today we're going to be discussing something called the 960 grid system. It's a really cool um, framework for building websites with cascading style sheets. Essentially, um, a designer decided to create this grid system that we could see here. That what happens is when these individuals are building these sites, for example, we have Sony Music, they use this pre-built template essentially and design and layout, which is based on geometry and mathematics and modernist principles and the Swiss design principles and all these great things that you can learn if you take survey of web design or graphic visualization in the future. But you'll see that what they're utilizing these grids for is to understand how to set the right proportions for the visualization and the eye to look at these different designs as we're looking at here. So with these different grid systems, essentially what we are going to do is we are going to coordinate these grid systems with cascading style sheets. And the way we're going to do that is first we have to start off with going to this big old download button. So we'll click on this big old download button and it's free to download. And after it's done downloading, we'll go to our downloads. And you'll see that I downloaded a couple times. If I go up here and I look at this zip file, let's just replace the one that we had before. And you'll have this zip file here, and then if you double click on the zip file, it will create this folder. Let's look inside this folder. So inside this folder, there's all these different things that were created because there's lots of different ways people want to utilize this 960 grid system. One are for app and plugins. Another one is for code that we'll look at. Licenses, this is for them talking about how to use their grid systems and not to copyright or try to reuse it under your own name. And then we have templates. So this also breaks it down into many different ways of using it with all sorts of softwares. One of them is Photoshop, and if we click on Photoshop, you could click, for example, this 12-column grid, and it'll create the grid for you. As a matter of fact, if we look over here, we'll see that I have created a banner with this grid system already in place. So what's really cool is if I am utilizing Photoshop, I can kind of design my elements here in Photoshop first, and then I can go in and we'll do I'll show an example of actually integrating this much later in this tutorial, but I can go in and I can either crop out this element here and click enter, and then I can go over here and I can save that element for web. It's going to be about 940 pixels wide, and we'll know that really well when we start doing that. And I can just click save here, and then I can use it exactly how it appears in Photoshop. Another method that we can use, if I go window here and history, that some designers like to use is something called the slice tool, and this is also something that you'll learn in the other classes, but I guess you'll learn it now too. So if we go over to the crop here and we go to this slice tool, we can use this slice tool and we can drag from one area all the way to the other, and we can create an element here. If we double click over here, we can name it what we want that element to be, and so we can call it like the header. And the interesting thing with the slice tool is this doesn't have to be the only element. You could create all the other elements, your pictures, and you slice them all up. You go to File again, you go to Save for Web, and then I'm going to save these as, let's go with a PNG, fine, and then this is the entire width of the page. The good thing is this header area is based on the 940 grid. So it's already set up to fit the specifics that we're looking for, even though I actually, in this scenario, made the page 1680. In other scenarios, if you just open up the PSD like I did before, it's not set to 1680. I do that personally because I like the extra space on the side. It just makes it easier for me to build and visualize what I'm trying to create. But nonetheless, I could click Save here, and then it says Images Only or HTML and Images. So if I do Images Only, what's going to happen, it's going to save all these images, and let's just put this onto the desktop here, onto the desktop in a folder of images. And that images folder is right over here, and if I drag that images folder over here, and I go into this header image, I'll see that header image here that was created from before and sliced up. And now I could take this image and place it directly onto my design. So nonetheless, that's another way that you can go about it, or you could just crop each one step by step, or you can use other methods as well. So nonetheless, that's part of that folder, which is the Photoshop element. And of course, if you use Illustrator or other ones, that's fine. Sketch sheets are sheets that you can download if you want to sketch them yourself with just a regular pen and paper. Just print them out and design what you want before you create it and sketch it out. But if we go to this code one over here, we're going to see a CSS folder over here. And in this CSS folder, we only really need to get started 3 of the images. So just to reiterate, 960 is a framework. It's built for us in advance. And it's got all sorts of really cool stuff. So if we go in here and we look at this CSS document, right? And we open it with our trusty Sublime text, you'll see all this stuff built into it. All these different grids, right? Or we could even go to this one that's called minified. And in the minified, if we go to the same 960.css, same file, but if you check this out, you'll see that everything is written on one line here, right? So what minified means, it's a process of removing all the unnecessary characters from source code without changing its functionality. These unnecessary characters usually include white space characters, new line characters, comments, and sometimes block delimiters, which are used to add readability to the code but are not required to execute. It's hard to read, that's for sure, but it's also an uncompressed version, so it's a little bit faster. It's a smaller file for sure when loading your website. So that's kind of nice if you want to go that way, unless you want to see everything that you're doing here. But the reality is once we learn how to use it, we don't really have to go in and play with all these different elements, especially because there's some other really cool tools in here where we could look at later, where it kind of goes into the fact of you can come in here and you can actually generate your own style if you really want. But nonetheless, to give a kind of a synopsis of what it looks like, this is how the grid breaks down. Okay, so it's based on a 960 space on a website. So that's it still is currently. It's getting closer to the point of where we can start moving to a larger space in order to build our sites. For example, some have moved to 980, not too far from 960, but they're starting to try to extend the bounds of the browser screen. And of course, all these are dependent based on people's display screens and which way that they're watching your site. You can't control how somebody looks at your site, so therefore you try to go based on percentages and what are the most common ways in which people view the site. So nonetheless, 940 will take you all the way across, and then you'll see that on each side there are gutters. These are the gutters over here. These are gutters here in between. So the gutters on each side will give you 10 and 10, which will add up to 960. And then in this side, you'll see that one column is 60, and this one is 860. And so these are, and then 140, and it just continues. But you essentially can choose how many rows or columns you want to use across by just saying, since this is 12 grids, right? If I want one grid, then I would only get 60 pixels across. If I want two, I'd get 140. So if this is a little confusing, you'll understand it better. But for example, this would be an example of somebody who just wants 60 across, right? And they could just have them in a row. But the really cool thing is it organizes in a way where it really creates a really organized, simplistic design that's really easy to prototype quickly. Let's go look at what pages we want to bring over. We've already downloaded. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new document here, and we're going to call this, let's call it our 960 tutorial, or a new folder, sorry. And then within that folder, I'm going to create a CSS folder here. And within that CSS folder, I'm going to drag this 960.css. That's one of the CSS files we're going to want. We're also going to want this reset.css and this text.css. So let's start with the easiest. The text.css is put into place for us to essentially change. It gets rid of the browser default text, taking out Times New Roman and places Helvetica, and it also resizes it. Although if you're going to build your own style sheet, which we will later, you don't necessarily need it because you could start identifying your own fonts and the way that you want to create it. And then the reset.css is a really cool CSS because if you recall all those prefixes that we were creating before, the reset is essentially a CSS just dedicated to prefixes so that all this grid will be able to be compatible to all these different browsers. So that's what's really nice about reset. So if you ever hear about a CSS reset, that's referring to a CSS document that's main purpose is to make sure that it's compatible with all the different browsers by utilizing those prefixes and by trying to understand what all the requirements are that are necessary to run properly on the browser. Okay, so now after that, we're going to have to start creating some pages here, right? So let's begin by creating our first index.html page. So I'm going to save this as, I'm going to do index.html, and I'm going to go to that desktop, and I'm going to go to that 960 tutorial. And let's save that here. All right, so let's start like we usually start with a doc type. And then after the doc type, let's add in the head of our document. After the head of the document, we're going to add in a new thing that I don't think we've used before, which is a char set, which equals UTF-8. And this char set is actually set up for, once again, kind of fonts and different language fonts that it'll relate to that. And this is one of the most universal char sets, so therefore all these different browsers will be able to understand what language characters you place in there. And that's pretty much what we're putting it for. So that if somebody who's speaking Spanish and you start writing Spanish into your HTML and that you want Spanish to show up on the browser, when the browser sees this char set UTF-8, it will know to go get that library of these different languages in order to show that language as properly as possible. That's a very short answer to this whole thing, but we're not going to be focusing entirely on that this class. After that, let's put in a quick title to get started. And we'll put in the title of 960 tutorial. After that, we got to link up all those style sheets that we just added into that folder. So the first one is 960.css, and that's relative to style sheet. And let's do some. Oh, let's do some copying and pasting. And let's change this one to reset.css. And we're going to change this one to that text.css. Okay. After that, let's close our head. And let's create our body. Okay, so the 960 framework is based on divs to define columns, and we'll need to define a container column, which we'll do with a class. So we're going to first define that container, and there's different options for those containers. So once again, if we go over here, you'll see here's the 24 option. There's 24 containers. There's 16 containers, and there's 12 column containers. So if you want more columns, there's other options that are available. So in this case, we're going to use the 12 column container, and we'll do div class, and this is going to be referenced to that style sheet, the 960.cs style sheet, and we're going to do container 12. So now we are inside this container. There will only be a max of 12 columns max because we have this container. And now we're going to put that closing div here. Okay, so another thing that what we're going to do is inside our container, we're going to establish our grid columns. This is considered recursion because what we're doing is we're putting a div inside of a div. And so when you do that, this is the parent div. And so we're going to create child divs within it. But the child div cannot outgrow this container here. So keep that in mind. So let's, for example, recursion is a baby inside a mother's womb, right? That baby cannot outgrow the mother's womb while it's inside of it, to give an example. Or potentially a kangaroo's pouch. So, okay, so let's look at recursion. And you could do that as a class inside a class, a div inside a div. There's lots of actually different ways in order to use recursion. So now let's add that first grid that we're going to do, which is div class equals grid 12. And within that grid, we'll create a header title here, and we'll do H1, and we'll call our header title Mobile and Web Design, which is actually the new name for the Web Design Department at Berkeley City College. So here we go, Mobile and Web Design, and then we got to close that div here. All right, so now that we've closed that div, let's go to the browser and see what we got. So far all we have is mobile and web design. What we don't realize is that actually this entire column here is dedicated just to this little piece of text. So let's enact something that'll make it look like all those pieces of text. The way we're going to do that is let's go back to here. Let's make another 12 div class. But this time, let's get some lorem ipsum. So it's Greek text that's often used for adding just kind of default text to a website. So we'll take this here, and I'm just going to copy that. You could right-click copy, or I did Command-C. And now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make these paragraph tags instead. And let's save that. And now let's go back to our page and let's see what happens here. Okay, we'll see that now all that text is going across those 12 columns, right? And that's demonstrating how this grid essentially works. Well, let's look at another example. What if we went in here and we change this to 6 columns? Just like that, that easily now our page is now broken up into 6 columns instead of 12 columns. We could of course select 4 columns if we would so choose. And now it's only the size of 4 columns. Okay, so now that we know that we can make it any size we want, let's start testing how we can create these, right? If we created this with 4 columns, we could actually have 3 columns go across to add up to 12, 4, 8, 12. But instead, let's try with 6. Let's also duplicate these here and add some more text. And then I'm just going to duplicate the grid 6 here. And I'm going to save that. And so now we have 2 6 columns pieces of text with the paragraph tags here, right? And this is a first paragraph and the second paragraph down this aisle, and then the first paragraph and second paragraph down the second aisle. So you'll notice that everything has to add up to 12. So for example, if I did 4 here, and then I did, well, let's try 4 and 8. Well, that works. Now I have 4 over here and 8 over here, and you'll see that this is the 4 that keeps on going down. But let's try 4 and 10 and see what happens. See, when it goes over 12 columns, it goes down to the next column. And so the next text will go down there. So everything has to add up to 12. If it goes over 12, it's going to be put down one line. Okay, so let's go back to our 2 columns here. I liked how that looked. 6 and 6. Let's click save and check that update. Okay, and now let's add 3 columns up above those 2 6 columns here. So we could essentially copy and paste because those columns are also going to have text. So let's copy and paste this here. And we're going to do 4 columns this time. We're going to do three rows of 4 column grids across. And let's save that. And you'll see here now we have 3 rows of 4 column text. And then when that ends, we have 2 rows of 6 column text. You know, for the 4 column text, let's cut out some of these paragraphs because it's getting kind of long. So we're going to cut out this paragraph here, this paragraph here, and this paragraph here. So let's go back to this website here, this 960 grid website. And let's go back and let's view this demo again. And so now you'll see that since we have things that are 4 columns, we can even count them 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So there is 300 pixels across. So each one of these guys here are 3. Let's refresh this. It should be smaller now. Let's see. Oh, I didn't update the first one. All right, so we updated that, and now let's go back over here. And now we'll see that we have 4 columns and then 2 columns. And I guess I deleted one of these guys, which let's put that back. Oh. All right, there we go. So now we have 4 columns and 2 columns across, right? And so this is, if we go over here and look, since it's 4 columns, it's 300 pixels. And then the one that's 6 columns across, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is 460 pixels. So if we were trying to create something with images, we would need it to be 460 pixels or less to fit within this area, and it would need to be 300 pixels or less to fit in that area. All right, so now we have our grid set up here. What we'll want to do now is let's create, because everything is kind of stacked together here and there's not a whole lot of spacing, right? Let's create a buffer right here. And the way we're going to create that buffer is we're going to create another 12 column grid in between, and I'm just going to copy and paste this here, in between the 4 column grids, in between these 4 column grids. So these 3 4 column grids are right here, right? And then underneath that we have 2 6 column grids, all right? Because 2 6 column grids add up to 12 and the 3 4 column grids add up to 12. So underneath these, I'm going to create one 12 column grid to create some spacing. And that's what I created here. And with that spacing, I'm just going to use a horizontal rule tag here. And the horizontal rule tag looks like this. And that's just going to create a line for a buffer between these two. So now I have kind of a separation between the two of them. You could see how easy it is to switch back and forth in the creation of layouts. If we were going to work with images, like I said before, you'd have to have the exact amount in Photoshop. Therefore, we will have to go and check the dimensions, potentially. Once you get good at it, you might not have to check those dimensions, but you should probably go and check those dimensions to make sure that you know the right size of the image that you would like to use. So as I said before, let's go check this out. So as I said before, I uploaded this 960.gs grid into my Photoshop, and with that I created this web photo plus web layout, right? In the example that I showed you, you'll see that I did that slice tool. Let's go back and let's see if it'll allow us to crop it while it's still sliced. We're going to go in and we are going to crop it here. Probably should zoom in a little bit to make sure I got those edges. And then I'm going to click return. Then we're going to File, Save for Web, and now I got my mobile and web banner that I had created. I want to make sure that that's 940, because if we go and we look at the grid layout, you'll see that all the way across is 940, not 960, right? So I want to make sure that's 940. I'm going to click Save, and I'm going to say 960 banner, and PNG. Save that onto the desktop. Let's close this Photoshop here. And let's hide this temporarily. And let's go find that 960 banner that we just created on the desktop. Oh, here we go. Here's that 960 banner. So if I open that, this is what the banner looks like. So now I'm going to drop this banner into my folder here. I'm going to copy this name because I'm going to need to enter that. And instead of my header at the top up here, where I had the header, I'm going to change that and I'm going to make it an image. So I'm going to do image source equals, and then I'm going to copy and paste that name of the banner in there. And then I'm going to do alt equals banner, just just in case. Okay, close that. Let's save it, and let's see what happens here with our grid system. Voila, we have our banner now set up with our page, right? And we have our horizontal bar going across. So things are starting to look good. Now, although this is a little bit, there's not a whole lot of room here. So you might say, well, I already have one of these lines going across here. So now let's just create a break, right? So in this case, instead of the horizontal ruler, I'm going to create a break, and I'm going to copy this 12 grid again, and instead of another picture, in this case, I'm going to add a break, so BR, and let's save that, and let's update it. So now we see that we have a 12 column break that goes across that gives us some spacing here, right? So it kind of creates an invisible divider for our page, and starts to give us a really nice look and easy to create appearance, essentially, of our page as well. Okay, so far we've been using this grid system. We created our own image title to put at the top. We could, of course, use a lot of the cool techniques that we used before to add on, but we'd have to, in order to do that, we'd have to create our own style sheet, right? We could, of course, put in our own text or our own images or videos into these different areas. We just have to specify how many columns we want them to go across. The really cool part is we're not having to worry about necessarily identifying how many pixels it is to organize on our page. We're just going by these blocks in order to figure that out. So now let's create our own style sheet to add to the mix. So we're going to have to go in here, and why don't we just create the style sheet first and, with the link, and then we'll build the actual style sheet. So we're going to create this, and we're going to call it css.style.css. We're going to click save. We're going to create a new file. We should save this as style.css inside our CSS folder. So let's now look at how we're going to use this CSS. So for our first style, we kind of want to add like a buffer to the top of this image, right? It's all the way at the top of the page. So it'd be nice to add maybe some padding to this header image that we're utilizing. So we'll create a header class. So we're going to create this header class, and then we're going to do padding, something at this point we're really familiar with, and 50 pixels from the top, and then 0, 0, 0. Now, of course, if we did 50 pixels from the bottom, we wouldn't have to do that invisible break. So let's save that, and then if we go back over here, what's really cool about CSS is it allows us to add multiple class assignments to a single call. So we'll go and we'll add our new class to the end of our current div that's using this banner. So if we go grid 12, and then we're going to add the class of header, and let's save that, and you'll see that now it goes way down. Let's make it maybe 20 pixels. And there we go. So now we're able to add different classes to our designs, and therefore we can use all those really cool techniques that we were using before. And just, we literally can keep adding them on to the end, just like what we were doing with the prefixes and those other styles of transitions and transforms and so on. Okay, so that's essentially how we are able to use the grid system and organize the grid system the way we want. As we said before, we have those gutters on the side, so if you wanted to create your own grid altogether, you can go to Custom CSS Generator, and in here you can decide, it says the full width is currently 960 and the gutter width is currently 20. So if I make the gutter width 40, you'll see that it makes the dimensions a lot larger. So I think we'll have to make that the column width about 40 to make things a little bit easier. And then we could just go over here and we could download the CSS file. And then it's going to give us all this text here, right? So if I go through and I Command A, or I right click on here and I select all, which it's not allowing me to do that here. But if I go to Edit and select all, and then I right click and I copy, or I Command click and I copy, and I go to that CSS page that I created before, that 960.css. I didn't want to open it that way. And I open this. Let's let's create a new one altogether. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this. We're going to paste all that stuff there. We're going to save this as 960, and then we'll put .40 because it's gutters .css, and we'll save that there. And then if we go back to our index file and we just update that 960.40.css and we save it, and we go to our new page, we'll see now we are able to create more gutters. So you can actually go in and you can design how you want your grid to look. And you can also, of course, go into Photoshop and you could design how you want all the different elements on your page to look, and you could kind of just plug them into place and build your site that way. It's a real quick and nice way to prototype, and it gives you this nice framework to build on, which gives you clean and nice looks that we saw that a lot of professionals already are using.